In 2018, a team of 20 people in Germany set up over 600,000 mini dominoes in an attempt to break a world record. After a couple of weeks of setting these small dominoes up one by one little wandering fly came in for a closer look. He landed on one domino and, well, let's just say that fly made a much bigger impact than he ever intended. He knocked them all over. Now, if you've ever tried to make a difference for children in foster care, you can identify with that fly. Maybe you started by joining a small group at church. Maybe you donated clothes to a foster care closet. Maybe you just took a meal over to those folks at church who had just become foster parents. And now looking back, you realize that your simple yes is leading you to something much bigger. Welcome to the party, little fly.
Welcome to the More Than Enough podcast, where we invite some of our friends to help you and some of your friends work together to provide more than enough, filling the biggest gaps for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Here's your host, Jason Weber.
Hey gang, welcome to the More Than Enough podcast. We are going to be talking today about what happens when people say a simple yes to a child or family affected by foster care and what that can eventually lead to. Very often it leads to way more than we could ever imagine. And the point of this episode is not to scare anyone. Instead, it's meant to show you just how big of an impact you can make. You might not think right now that your little yeses that you have made so far can lead to giant impact, but we're going to show you that it really can. And so I can't wait for you to hear from our guests today and learn more about what that can look like. But before we get there, I want to introduce you to an 11-year-old who knows all about how one thing can lead to another and another and another. This is domino enthusiast Severin Westerdale.
I am Severin Westerdale, and I am 11 years old.
Now, Severin, tell me how you got into domino toppling.
It all started when I think I was about 7, and somebody had bought this pretty big domino toppling set for my birthday. And ever since then, I became more and more interested making bigger and bigger sculptures of domino and then knocking it down.
So what is a domino competition like?
It really depends on the competition. In smaller ones, like the ones I've hosted, it's a few people building domino sculptures on small plates that we got from Home Depot. And with bigger ones, it can look like massive teams of people spending weeks on massive domino projects.
What's the biggest domino project you've ever done?
Ooh, that would be a hard one. I'd say the biggest domino project I've ever done is when I went to the Iowa Juggling Club and I showed some people how domino worked. And I managed to make a pretty big sculpture with a bunch of people and knocked it down for a YouTube video.
What do you like about domino toppling?
I like that you can make these massive designs, and at the end you can watch the satisfying process of it all slowly falling down.
Have you ever started stacking a lot of dominoes and you got pretty far in, but you weren't done yet and you accidentally knocked them over?
Yes, that happens daily, and my dad wakes up to whoosh. Oh, come on! It's pretty annoying, but the whole end goal is to knock it down anyway, so I don't usually get that mad.
All right, so talking to Severin was so fun. Here's a kid who found something he enjoyed. He started this club and invited others to enjoy it with him. You gotta love that. You know, one of the things I love about what he said was that when he has dominoes that fall over before it's time, that his perspective is, well, the goal was to knock them down anyway, so there's no use getting frustrated. Man, that's what a great perspective. If I was one of those German folks, though, that set up those 600,000 dominoes, I'm not sure I'd feel the same way, but man, power to them. That's awesome, Severin. Well, I wanted to ask a few of my friends who are now very engaged in foster care advocacy. In fact, they work with me here at CAFO. I wanted to ask them what their first yes was, and here's what they had to say.
My name is Phil Goad. I first said yes when my wife and I went to an information meeting about possibly becoming respite care foster parents here in the state of Arkansas where we live. During that, I heard about court-appointed special advocates, and at that time I was involved in my career in court testimony and providing testimony, and I thought that is something I could do to help kids in foster care, so I said yes to that. Later on, we have had the chance to launch a brand new statewide effort here in the state of Arkansas called Every Child in Arkansas, with the vision of more than enough for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care in every county in our state.
Hey, I'm Amanda Baird from Georgia, and in 2015, I was asked to have a background check to babysit 2 girls who were in foster care. I said yes, and then I said yes to providing respite care, and then I said yes to foster care, and then I said yes to fostering sibling groups, and now I am working as a foster care advocate.
Hey, my name is Jason Johnson, and I'm from Texas, and in 2011, my wife and I and some people from our church attended a conference, and we strolled into a breakout session on foster care, and an hour later walked out and knew that if what I had just heard was true, it would change everything for our church and our family. And so we started to say yes to supporting families in our church and in our community. And then my wife and our family said yes to becoming foster parents. And now I get to work with other churches as they say yes to helping provide more than enough for children and families all around the country.
Gang, these are 3 great examples. And if there were time, we could have thousands of examples just like this, where a simple yes to a small thing leads to all kinds of things that make a bigger impact. So coming up next, we'll hear from 2 other people who said yes in Oklahoma to something fairly small, and then how those small yeses have become part of a huge story that God is writing in Oklahoma. And we'll hear about that after this. Hey gang, we're going to get back to things here in just a minute, but before we do, I wanted you to know that you can find the show notes for this episode by going to morethanenoughpodcast.org. There's some more information about our guests there, and we have some resources that can help you take your next steps to bring people together in your community to provide more than enough for children and families. And one last thing, at the top of the show notes, there are some buttons that allow you to choose where you normally listen to your podcast, and you can leave a review for the More Than Enough podcast right there. We would be super grateful if you'd be willing to take the time to do that. Reviews help us to know what we're getting right and how we can give you more of the same in the future. Again, all of this is at morethanenoughpodcast.org. All right, let's get back to things. Welcome back. This next conversation is with Chris Campbell and Misty Seale from Oklahoma. Now, we talked to them about how their small yeses led to something very significant in Oklahoma. And so let's go ahead and dive into that conversation. Here we go. I'm here with Chris Campbell and Misty Seale from the great state of Oklahoma. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Doing good.
I feel like we need to do our theme song, like start Oklahoma or something to introduce. You know, you got to have some type of welcome.
Hey,
Okie welcome.
You are welcome. You have the floor. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. You know, there's been some fantastic things that have been happening in Oklahoma over the last several years, and we're really excited for our listeners to be able to hear about those things directly from you guys. Chris, you lead an organization called the 111 Project for the state of Oklahoma. And Misty, you are also very involved in that work and about a million other things, and also an adoptive mom. And so I want to start with Chris. You started out as a pastor. And so now, as the leader of the 111 Project, your goal is to engage 6,200 churches in the state of Oklahoma and get them involved in foster care. What does that look like on a practical level?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, there's a lot of pragmatic things, but from a spiritual standpoint, for me, the biggest thing is the discipleship challenges associated with foster care. I think if really as a church, we were discipling and leading in the way that we all dreamed that we could, and people had the relationship with Jesus that we wanted them to have, and the depth that they had in that relationship with Jesus, things like biblical hospitality associated with foster care wouldn't really be an issue. And so for me, one of the reasons I'm real passionate about this whole space and the work in foster care is I really believe it's a great opportunity for the church to kind of live out all the things that we talk about, from the Great Commission to the Great Commandment to just basic Christian living. And that's loving on children that need temporary places to stay or need forever families, or seeing reunification and restoration with biological families. So pragmatically, it's a lot of conversations with church leaders. We spend a lot of time visiting with local churches and asking them about, how they're engaged, what are they doing well, and could they potentially pivot some of those things into really trying to make an impact on the whole child welfare space.
Yeah, I love that you brought this up in the context of discipleship. Often, I think we think of discipleship as the thing that you do to help a young believer or a new believer come along in the faith, learn the first six things you need to know, learn how to have a quiet time, learn how to pray, learn how to, and eventually discipleship moves into how do you have, good relationships with your significant other, your spouse, how do you parent, like all of those things. But then, I think often we think of social issues like foster care as sort of a separate thing, like it fits in a different box that we need to care about hurting people, but that's sort of a separate box from discipleship. Tell me why you think that's in the same box.
Yeah, I think a lot of church leaders are scared of social gospel issues. They feel like the serving can become the idol. And I agree with that. I think it really can. There's a lot of people out there that are doing good things, and that those good things have become their God. But I think also we have to recognize with the church that the scripture is very, very clear about right action, that we are about good works. We are about biblical hospitality. And so there's this right thinking, there's these right relationships, right relationship with Jesus and community and the church, but there's definitely right action. And so if we have this big black eye that's foster care, and specifically the foster care crisis being we have kids waiting on families instead of families on kids, then if we believe what we say we believe about Jesus and the kingdom, there's a little bit of a black eye on the church to say, hey, we're not fulfilling the work that we should be doing because this issue exists. And so for me, I think there's a little bit there to say, back to this more than enough theme with CAFO, there should be more than enough. And we should strive for that until Jesus brings us home. We shouldn't just say, that's just not going to happen until heaven.
And Misty, so how did you end up here? How did you end up in this space?
Well, it's kind of interesting. God started working on my heart, and I knew no one who had adopted. Who had fostered. I didn't know any foster children. It was crazy how my eyes were just completely closed off to that. And so that's kind of my passion as well, just like Chris, is just, I think there's so many people in the church that don't really know about it. They don't see it. Their eyes aren't open to it. It was just, God started working on me. I started learning about CAFO, and I learned about a documentary called Stuck. And it's just, I saw the trailer, and of course it's about international adoption. And I watched the trailer, and I was like, where can I see this documentary? And I saw that it was coming to Oklahoma City for one night. So I said, and then it said you can volunteer. And so it was just all these yeses that I did. So I said, yes, I want to volunteer. I want to get the word out about it. And then I came across a gentleman at one of the events leading up to the documentary named Daniel. And he just asked me, hey, I know you're adopting. What church do you go to? I told him what church. And he was like, do you have an orphan care ministry at your church? And I said, no. And he was like, well, you should start one. And I said, okay, sure. And I literally walked away going, there's no way I'm doing that. Like, I am a stay-at-home mom. Like, I'm basically, the enemy was telling me, you're nobody. Nobody's going to listen to you. It was just a lot of, and this happened like in March of 2013. And then from that time until November, when, Orphan Sunday happens, God was just, I learned about CAFO. I learned about Orphan Sunday. I wasn't seeking it out, but God was putting it in front of me. And when I knew it was Orphan Sunday, on that Sunday, I went to my church, and they didn't even mention foster care or orphans or anything. I came home that day and I just had like this righteous anger. Like, what is going on, And it was in that moment that God was like, you're going to do this. And it's not going to be you. It's going to be me. And I'm going to work through you. And I am telling you, from that moment on, when I said yes in that moment, it's like the Holy Spirit was just like, do this, contact this person. And so it's just like amazing how God just he was doing everything. It was nothing of me. It was only him.
So, Chris, as you engage with churches and people like Misty all the time, right? And what I love is, this is such a common story, is people, and that's, I believe that it's one of the ways we know the difference between foster care activity, which is what we've kind of always had, in foster care movement, is once you get to foster care movement, you have a whole bunch of people engaged in foster care who don't have any training to do so. And, one of my favorite parts of Nehemiah is where it lists the different people who are working on the wall, and it lists a perfumer. And we should never underestimate the power of a perfumer to restore broken things, right? And so as you engage perfumers and people doing all sorts of things in churches, what are the things you're finding in terms of impact? Like, how do we know that what you're doing is actually making a difference in Oklahoma?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. And I think there's big parts of it, that we look at the data and the numbers and those types of things. But I think you hit the nail on the head too. I think it's the scope of everybody seeing that they have a part in some way, and getting to a place where it's not about your territory or your kingdom or your, tower or machine that you're trying to build, but really where it just kind of permeates the culture. And how we're seeing it is that there's so many things going on that not one organization could claim any of it. It really is like this swelling of movement and activity, and people starting things, doing fundraisers, having projects, organizations collaborating, policies and bills being passed, all these different things lead to what we really all want. And that's a cultural shift and change in a community, where when we talk about foster care, it's not something like Misty and I getting exposed to where nobody talked about it and there wasn't anybody that you knew that fostered. And for me personally, I didn't grow up around anybody that I remember that ever was a foster parent. And now, I know part of it isn't because I'm highly involved in this area, but I don't talk to many people that are as ignorant as I was as a senior pastor of a church, as a lead pastor at a church. There was a large church and to think how ignorant I was not that long ago. And yet right now it's becoming part of our culture from the highest levels of leadership in our state to, trauma-informed care at a school. That whole radical transformation is a sign that the work that we're doing is not in vain. It's changing culture. It's changing community. It's changing what the church sees as important in their mission and their calling to living out, Jesus's work on this earth.
Now, Chris, over the life of the 111 Project, you've seen in the state of Oklahoma the number of kids in foster care drastically reduce. And when we say that, we understand and we acknowledge the complexity of that, right? It's not, we know it's not all because of 111 Project. There's a lot of people, working together to make change happen in Oklahoma. Two, we know that when numbers go down in foster care, it's not always just because we're winning. Sometimes it may be because kids who need to be in care are not being put in care. And so, ultimately, we want to be a church that is ensuring that every kid is safe. But with those caveats, tell us what kind of decrease you've seen in the state of Oklahoma in terms of the number of kids in foster care.
Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a great reduction where these trends that got kind of at their peak are now going back the other way, not dramatically, not in this way that you would be knee-jerk worried that some policy change happened, but just slowly from 12,000 kids in care now to having some of the lowest that we've had in the last decade, close to 7,800 kids in care. And then the other things too that have happened, like record number of adoptions and less kids living in our shelters, less dependency on congregate care, like group homes and things like that. And so we begin to see this kind of cultural and seismic shift that shows in the numbers that speaks also to change, speaks to community engagement, to the point now, like what's really exciting when we talk really about the More Than Enough initiative and go into some of our counties, we're talking about 1 to 2 kids in an entire county with 60 to 80 churches that needed an adoptive family. And so when you start really breaking it down to the community level, back to this kind of county More Than Enough level, there is more than enough. I mean, like that's what needs to be shouted from the mountaintops is there's more than enough families and churches and people to be involved, to the point that we could take every single kid and advocate for them directly until we found a home. It's that tangible.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, thank you guys both so much for showing us the power of the yes, what it can mean to kids and families, and what it can mean to an entire state. We're grateful for the work you do and thankful that you've spent the time with us.
Our pleasure, Jason. Thanks so much for your guys' leadership. It's fun to be a part of.
That is beautiful. What a great example of what saying yes can do. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that was awesome, and they're making this huge impact, and that I'm so happy for them. But my impact is much smaller, and I'm not sure it makes that big a difference. Well, just hang on. Right after this, we're going to prove you wrong. What do you do when you have a problem so big you know you can't solve it alone? Well, Herman Ostry was faced with a problem just like that. He lived on a farm in Bruno, Nebraska, and he had a barn that was always flooding. In fact, one time they had standing water that measured 29 inches high. The options seemed ridiculous and expensive and difficult, and maybe the most ridiculous option of all he thought of one night at the dinner table. He said to his family, if we had enough people, we could pick this thing up and move it. Well, he gathered 344 people, and that's just what they did. And we were so inspired by Farmer Herman's story that we wrote a children's book about it. Now, how in the world do you illustrate it? Well, it seemed to us the best way to illustrate a children's book about 344 people working together to solve a big problem was to have 344 people illustrate it. So we got our friends. Kids, foster parents, adoptive parents, advocates, organizational leaders, authors, and recording artists, 344 of them, to help us illustrate Farmer Herman and the Flooding Barn. This is a tool that you can use with your families, with your donors, with anyone that you want to help understand that it's going to take all of us to move the barn and get to more than enough. So, of course, you can order Farmer Herman and the Flooding Barn on Amazon. But if you want 12 or more copies for your children's ministry, for a donor event, or some other outreach, Just go to the show notes for this episode at morethanenoughpodcast.org. Again, that's morethanenoughpodcast.org. Just go to the show notes and find a link there for our bulk ordering page. And hey, let's go move the barn. So like I said before the break, you might be listening to this thinking, yeah, that's great that their yeses of all these people that we've been listening to led to such big things, but I'm just not sure I'm in a position to make that kind of an impact. I don't know that I have the time or the talents or whatever in order to make that kind of impact. Well, I just want to have you listen to this one last little part of the conversation with Chris. He told an incredible story of someone who is making a tremendous impact, and you are going to be inspired by it. So let's talk to Chris about his friend, Kay. So this question is for either of you, but what can you tell me any stories you have of whether it's a church that came online unexpectedly and has had a tremendous impact, or whether it's a particular county or community that's blown up, or whether it's a story of a family that has just blown your socks off? Can you share a little bit of that with me?
I've got thousands of stories and could talk all day about this. But one I just love talking about is my friend Kay Leslie, that's a part of a church here in Tulsa. And Kay's sweet church, Faith United Methodist. They're not the biggest in town. They're not the smallest in town. But what I really love about Kay and her people is Kay started getting involved through our Care Portal platform ministry here in Oklahoma. And Kay is homebound oftentimes. She's a senior adult. But Kay would tell you, oftentimes some of her physical limitations keep her at home. And she can't even go to church. But she was a foster parent and now in a season of life where she can't foster anymore and was really just feeling like she didn't have a role or a place. And she became kind of an advocate for the needs in our community. And her church has single-handedly made one of the greatest impacts in our state just by Kay being a quarterback. And what I love is not just that impact that Kay has made in seeing families reunified and restored and reconciled, and foster families taking placements and adoptive families, finalizing adoptions. But the testimony of Kay was, Chris, I love going to church when I haven't been able to go to church because of my physical limitations. And she said, what I love is I get to see all these people that I still get to do community with and do life with. And I get to hug them and celebrate with them the work of God in our community, because she said yes. And so to know that Kay's value and wisdom and experiences are still being used and not forgotten, to the brand new young foster and adoptive family, that's just stepping in for the first time, that's completely unaware of the world that they're stepping into, to me just blesses my socks off, because you just really get to see everybody has a role, from the grandmas to the teenagers, to the young kids, being sensitive about the new kid in their Sunday school class, that comes from a hard place. All those things make a difference in the whole ecosystem.
Chris, I hope you don't feel like I'm calling you out on this, but I'm looking at you and you got tears running down your face as you talk about Kay. Why do stories like Kay emotionally stir you in this way?
I don't know how you can't get excited about people being the church, people living out their calling. To see people like Kay just say yes. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard for Kay to come to a community meeting sometimes because of just how she feels. But yet she comes and she participates and she serves and she connects, and she has wins, but she also has days where caseworkers haven't been nice to her, and and who knows what's on the caseworker side, what they've gone through, and yet those actions, to me, if Jesus says that he stores up our tears in heaven, even more so, these acts of righteousness, how are they celebrated? And so I just think as a church, we've got to get excited about people being involved and encourage and spur one another on to love and good deeds and celebrate those things.
Man, that fires me up, and I hope it fires you up too. You know, the only way to get to more than enough in your community is with a whole bunch of folks just like Kay. They are there. They just may need to be given one small, doable opportunity to say yes. And you may be the one to put that opportunity in front of them. So here's to all the Kays out there and to the ones you are about to discover in your own community. Well, that's going to do it for us today. I want to thank our guests, as well as our producer, Amanda Baird, and our audio engineer, Daniel Davidson. You know, our community of churches, organizations, and advocates are here to help you with that first yes and every yes after that until there's more than enough.
This has been the More Than Enough podcast. Join us next time as we introduce you to more of our friends who are passionate about helping you and your friends work together to provide more than enough for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Explore show notes and learn more at morethanenoughpodcast.org.